Inca Capacocha rituals. The Incans were known for the Capacocha rituals, which were meant to make the gods happy and bring balance and prosperity to their empire. During these rituals, the Incans purposefully chose the most beautiful out of all of the children in the city. Children of both genders needed to be selected. Local communities from the empire needed to supply these children yearly, and no community was exempted from this rule. The males should not be older than 10, while the girls could be as old as 16. For many families, it was an honor for their children to be selected because it meant getting chummy with the emperor. "Hey, emperor, we gave you our child, so why not give us more land in exchange?" The kids would then be taken to Cusco, the capital city of the Inca Empire, where they would be treated like kings and queens for a year. They made these children eat the best foods, while teaching them important life skills. Unlike some of their ancient neighbors, these kids were not meant to be food for the gods. Instead, they were meant to be messengers between the Incas and their deities. That's why these kids needed to be treated like royalty before they would be sacrificed. A year later, the chosen children would be dressed in the best clothes and led to a mountain or lake. These kids were made to drink substances that forced them to sleep so that their deaths would be peaceful. If the site of the sacrifice was cold, they'd leave the child to die from hypothermia. In all other cases, they'd kill the children using a swift blow to the head. After that, the Incas expected the souls of these kids to travel to the place of the gods. Aztec human sacrifices. You think that life was simple for you and your friends living in the Aztec civilization hundreds of years in what is now Mexico, but your tribe's chief suddenly asks if anyone was willing enough to sacrifice themselves to the gods. That was when everyone around you started pointing fingers, because no one wanted to be the next guy to be sacrificed to the gods. Aztec priests would conduct ceremonies before removing the victim's heart while the victim was still alive, ensuring that the heart was still beating. They would offer the heart to the gods before throwing the lifeless body down the temple steps. The practice is deeply rooted in their lore, which says that the Aztec gods had sacrificed themselves to create and sustain the world, so they had to sacrifice people to the gods. The sun god Huitzilopochtli, for example, was thought to use human hearts to make the sun rise every day, so they believed human sacrifices were necessary to continue the cycle of nature and the cosmos. Okay gods, here is your human sacrifice. Thank you, and please continue doing your job. While the Aztecs still sacrificed their own people in rare instances, they usually sacrificed war captives and slaves. Even if they needed to sacrifice one of their own, they saw it as their duty to their people. So yeah, it wasn't too bad to get sacrificed after all. Chinese Lingqi. The Chinese were known for inventing many creative things, including certain methods of killing people in public rituals. One such method that existed until the early 1900s is called Lingqi, which literally means death by 1,000 cuts. If you were a criminal who deserved the worst punishments in China, they wouldn't kill you quickly. Instead, they had to give you the slowest and most painful death possible in front of a live audience. You'd get tied up in public, such as a town square. From there, the executioner would get a big knife and cut small pieces of flesh slowly. Then they'd put salt in all of those tiny little wounds all over your body to make them hurt even more. And every few hours, they'd wash your wounds with cold water to clean them and repeat the entire process, making it even more brutal. Lingqi was meant to make you suffer instead of killing you quickly. They'd start by cutting your chest, arms, and legs, while avoiding vital organs to make the ritualistic killing last as long as possible. While that happens, Chinese officials read the charges against you to ensure that everyone in attendance knows the consequences of breaking the law. After that, if you haven't bled to death yet, the executioner would deliver a final blow to the heart or strangle you in an act of mercy. Lingqi wasn't just made to kill you, instead it was also meant to humiliate you in front of a lot of people. Lingqi was used for hundreds of years all over China. The last time a person was killed using this method was in 1905. Since then, it has been outlawed for being a bit too brutal. Celtic wicker man. You probably know the people of Ireland for their incredible drinking habits, but you probably didn't know that these people were supposedly into giant human-shaped structures made out of wood. But these wooden dolls were made for a sinister purpose. Celtic priests, called druids, were known to be close to nature and the gods. According to ancient Roman writings, especially those by Julius Caesar, who often described the Celts as barbaric people, these druids ordered the construction of these wicker men to honor their deities. They stuffed the wicker men with live humans or animals and set them on fire to offer them to the divine to ensure good harvests and victories in war. Caesar said that they prioritized criminals as they preferred victims. However, if there were no criminals, they were willing to burn innocent people alive. So if you lived with the Celts back then, you'd wish that they had a few criminals in stock for these sacrifices. Honoring their gods was one thing, but there was another rumored reason why the Celts burned people. According to Greek geographer Strabo, the ashes of people burned in the wicker man were said to help crops grow. Only years later, they figured out that poop can be just as good fertilizer for their crop, even better than the ashes from an innocent burned human, so they stopped doing this practice. Thuggee cult in India. While ancient cultures did most ritualistic killings, the Thuggee cult in India said during the 1800s, "Hey, let's make ritualistic killings cool again." The Thuggees, however, operated in the shadows during the 19th century. This cult was made up of criminals who worshipped the Hindu goddess Kali, but they took their worship to a dark level by using murder as a way to prove their devotion to her. These criminals targeted unsuspecting travelers. They lured them with their friendship before killing them once they dropped their guard. But the Thuggees didn't use just any ordinary method of killing. Instead, they preferred strangulation with a handkerchief or noose because they believed that this was what Kali wanted. But the Thuggees were not just random criminals. Instead, this cult had an organized way of doing things, often raising young Thuggees from childhood to train them in the art of deception and murder. They often operated in groups that had members with specific roles to play. One guy scouted the victims, while the other guy specialized in befriending them. The most skilled person in the group took care of the killing. Finally, one member was responsible for disposing of the body. So if you were a random traveler in India during the 19th century, you were never told to befriend strangers, because these people could be Thuggees hiding under the guise of being friendly locals. Viking blood eagle. When you think about the Vikings, you'd surely imagine large bearded men landing from their longboats to ransack villages while chopping people left and right with huge axes. But as brutal as Vikings were, they still had limits, especially regarding their laws. It was okay for them to pillage entire villages, kill innocent villagers, and women. However, if you betrayed your fellow Vikings, then you deserve to die in the worst way possible in a ritual killing known as the blood eagle. What happens is that they'd lay you on your belly, cut your back open, and pull your ribs out through the cut. After that, your lungs were pulled through the opening to create a pair of wings. Now you know why it's called the blood eagle. You'd look like a winged warrior with lungs dripping with blood. But to make matters worse, they'd pour salt in the wounds to make you suffer while bleeding. However, there was never any real evidence that the Vikings actually did this. Only 2 accounts mention the blood eagle being used to kill someone. Some historians argue that the Viking blood eagle was just a horror story told by the Norse people to keep them in line. It could have been a horror story that Viking wives told their children to make sure that they'd never do bad things, just like how our parents tell us about the boogeyman. Whatever the case, no one wants to die with their lungs jutting out of their back. Vestal Virgin's Burial. Being a Vestal Virgin, a priestess worshipping the goddess Vesta, would have been the best gig for you if you lived as a woman in ancient Rome. These women had plenty of privileges. For example, they could go around the city in fancy chariots or could pardon criminals. But being a Vestal Virgin came with a catch, and there's a good reason why they were called virgins. You had to be celibate for 30 years, which means that no sex for you for 3 decades. No dates with those armored and muscle-bound Praetorian guards for you. If you broke your vow by doing the deed with someone and losing your virginity, you'll be punished in the worst way possible. Vestal virgins who lost their virginity within their 30-year vow deserved death. But the problem was that, according to their laws, the Romans couldn't spill the blood of a Vestal virgin. As such, the only way to kill them was to bury them alive. Technically, however, it was also forbidden to have burials inside a Roman city, so the solution was actually simple. The Romans would keep the Vestal virgins locked inside a room, letting them die of thirst and hunger. So while it was called a burial, it wasn't necessarily a burial at all. We on this channel also provide special privileges to anyone willing enough, regardless of whether or not you're a virgin. You just have to join our Discord. Japanese seppuku. The Japanese samurai valued honor above everything else, so much so that they'd be willing to kill themselves if they lost their honor or if they insulted the honor of their lord. This Japanese ritual suicide was called seppuku, which was the final act a samurai could commit so that they could die with their honor intact. If you were a samurai who, let's say, accidentally told your shogun that he was ugly while you were drunk, you would either voluntarily commit seppuku or wait for your lord to tell you to do it. During the ritual, you must wear white robes to symbolize purity. From there, you write a death poem before grabbing a short blade. You'd have to stab your belly with the small blade while making a left to right cut. This is meant to demonstrate your resolve, as you're supposed to be able to still cut yourself despite feeling all the pain in the world after stabbing yourself. But it's not the disembowelment that kills you. Instead, a samurai called a second will stand beside you with a sharp katana in hand. The second will be responsible for beheading you with one quick slash after you've made the initial cut on your belly. Seppuku isn't just about dying for the sake of dying, it's about dying with honor, and that's why only those worthy of an honorable death were allowed to commit seppuku. But the Japanese don't practice this anymore, or else we'd be seeing dozens of Japanese students committing seppuku for bringing dishonor to the family after not getting an A in math. Scythian human sacrifices. More than 1,000 years ago, the Scythians were the OG hippies. They lived nomadic lifestyles in the Eurasian steppes. These people were deeply spiritual and believed in the afterlife. So whenever someone important died, they wouldn't send them off on their own. These send-off parties or rituals usually involved some of the most important things to the significant Scythian person who had just died. In most cases, this happens whenever their leaders or chiefs die. They'd bundle horses, servants, or even the best friends of these Scythian leaders and bury them alive in a big pit together with their deceased buddy. In fact, archaeologists have found ancient Scythian burial mounds with entire people and horses bundled together. They did this because they wanted people close to their leaders to accompany them in the afterlife. The Scythians believed that their leaders needed a gang in the great beyond. The more important the do, the more people would be buried together with him. So if you were a Scythian during ancient times, it's best not to be drinking buddies with the most important guy in the group, because this will be a sure ticket to death. Hawaiian human sacrifices. Hawaii may seem like the best tropical island destination for you. Still, there was a time when this paradise on Earth wasn't exactly all about basking under the sun and drinking pina coladas while watching people surfing. During the darker times in Hawaiian culture, the ancient Hawaiians often endured extreme famine. In some cases, they were at war with other tribes. Such instances required them to go through extreme measures by sacrificing people to make the gods happy and to protect the people. Usually, a high priest or chief would select the best person to be sacrificed based on a certain criterion. They would often choose a person from a defeated tribe, especially if they want to win another war. But if there were someone expendable in their tribe, such as the person who often sucked at fighting or didn't have any talents, he would be sacrificed for fertile harvests. However, if you were a tribesman chosen to be sacrificed, it's not all about being gloomy for you, because it was your solemn duty to die to protect your people. That's why the chosen sacrifice was treated with reverence and respect. After being prepared for the ritual, the chosen person would have to lie face down on a stone altar where a priest would kill him swiftly using a sharp blade. From there, the body would be offered as a gift to the gods, as the Hawaiians believed that the mana, the person's life force, would help strengthen the tribe and bring fertility to the community. Mayan heart extraction. You probably know the Mayans for scaring the shit out of everyone when, in 2012, their calendar predicted the end of the world that year. But you've also probably heard that these guys were known for their bloody religious rituals. These guys believed their gods needed nourishment to keep the world running smoothly. But because they thought the gods were bloodthirsty deities, the Mayans also believed that offering human hearts was the only way to prevent them from getting angry and hungry. After all, even the gods need something to eat to use their powers. Ceremonies involving prisoners or slaves were done at the top of Mayan pyramids. It started with a dispersal of blood extracted from the victim's mouth or penis. Yeah, not only would you be sacrificed for the gods, but you should also say goodbye to your manhood before you get killed. The human sacrifice would be laid on a stone altar before a priest would use a blade to make a quick cut on the chest, making sure that the victim was still alive. The heart needed to be extracted while it was still beating, and that was why these priests were trained to know how to extract a heart without killing the human sacrifice. After the heart is extracted, the priest would lift it up into the sky, offering it to the gods. This act was the Mayans' way of keeping their gods happy, because they needed human hearts to nourish their powers, ensuring the world wouldn't end just yet. So maybe it's possible that the world didn't end in 2012 because someone sacrificed a human heart. Who knows?